All right, let's get to my conversation tonight. The World Bank has pledged new funding commitments to Kenya of up to 2.4 billion shillings for the remainder of this financial year as part of support for a strong pipeline of operations to support the Kenyan government. This is according to Victoria Kwakwa, the World Bank's Vice President for East and Southern Africa, during her visit to the country this week. She says there is a common strategic orientation between the Kenya Kwanza administration's bottom-up agenda and the bank's shared prosperity agenda. She sat down with me to talk about her visit here and her talks with President William Ruto. Now, I started by asking her about the nature of those talks and her assessment of Kenya's economy.
And I must say that compared to several other countries, Kenya is weathering it quite well. Growth is beginning. The government has been very good at managing macroeconomic stability, at continuing to achieve reductions in inflation. And it's also focusing a lot of attention on the debt issues and what to do to achieve the fiscal consolidation that would give fiscal space and avoid the debt level becoming a problem. And what it's doing on that front is credible because we're seeing improved market sentiment towards the actions of the Kenyan government. So that is good, and we're happy to be able to support. So overall, I think things are moving in the right direction. It's never perfect. You know, I think one of the important things will be to continue to support the poorest and the most vulnerable who would be hurting the most at this difficult time.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, what the government is doing. And you've mentioned the fiscal consolidation. There's increased revenue mobilization, especially through taxes. Where do you think Kenya's priorities should be, and how can we better support the most vulnerable to carry them along?
Well, I think on the fiscal consolidation, action is needed on several fronts, and I think it's beginning to take shape already. You mentioned the taxes, so how can the government raise more? It's not necessarily through increasing tax rates. It's about looking comprehensively about the tax framework to see how well it supports the objective of helping the government raise revenues, doing this in a progressive way, and in a way that does not distort incentives for private sector activity. So all of those should be important in deciding what kind of tax framework comes into place. And I think the government is beginning to look at that. Then there's also action that's needed on expenditure efficiency. That will also help the consolidation. So it's looking at all government expenditures and looking at where there is inefficient use of expenditures and how that can be changed so that you make sure that every shilling that is being spent is being used as effectively as possible, and making sure that subsidies that are in place are being used effectively to target those who need the support the most, and other subsidies that might not really be speaking to the particular issue or supporting those who need it the most can be repurposed to other forms of expenditure. So I think you need actions on both the expenditure side and the revenue side. In terms of the drought, I think there's also a short-term effort to support the most vulnerable with the basic food needs and so on. But it's also important to work on the more medium-term agenda, and you need to do it now to continue to build resilience of agriculture, of livestock, all these sectors that are really important. So there's a short-term immediate need, and there's a more medium-term agenda. And the inclusion that you've mentioned is super important, making sure that the poorest of the poor are supported.
Yeah, and you've mentioned efficient use of resources. Corruption is a big conversation in many economies and in Kenya as well. What more can we continue to do to strengthen our anti-corruption measures, perhaps find the loopholes, and how important is that in terms of ensuring Kenya's continued growth?
Well, several countries are looking at this issue, of course, including Kenya. I think bringing greater transparency into how things are done and also using digital approaches where things can be done more easily and there's not as much need for human interaction, if I should say. So people can pay their taxes online, they can pay some of their obligations online and don't necessarily have to go to somebody. So the digital technology can be something that really helps. And then I think it's strengthening government systems, whether it's systems for procurement, systems for public financial management, to bring accountability, to bring transparency, and to bring a search for competition into these processes. I think all of these will help. And finally also measures or actions that give a demand for accountability from the part of ordinary citizens, ordinary Kenyans, who can voice and who can understand and ask questions and, speak up about issues.
Right. What do you think of Kenya's private sector? It's known to be vibrant and would be important in terms of, the growth of the economy and providing employment. What is the bank's role in supporting Kenya's private sector to do this?
Sure. We see the Kenyan private sector as one of the most dynamic in the region. So that's a testament to the Kenyan people and the entrepreneurial skill. And so we believe the Kenyan private sector has contributed a lot to the country and can do even more. And it's really important that they are empowered to do even more, because Kenya has big ambitions. And Kenya we see as a potential leader in the region and even on the continent. And so we are supporting in different areas, first of all, in the MSME sector, which a lot of the private sector is in. We're supporting with access to finance, we're supporting with building skills and training. I also want to talk about unemployed youth, who are a big part of the private sector, and sometimes we don't recognize them as such. And so all that we're doing to build their skills and to help them also find sources of maybe self-employment or their own employment, I think that's also important. Now, we're working, of course, with a larger, more formal private sector, largely through our IFC, which is our private sector arm, but we're also working to improve the regulatory and policy environment so that there's more policy stability and the incentives are conducive to a well-functioning private